Sarah's going to email me in a few hours, but right now I'm sitting on the front porch trying to play cool. The old couch is getting some holes, and it's the most comfortable place to rest outside of my room. I hope my mom doesn't move it to the yard and try and sell it. Dad and Henry are still at the creek fishing, which doesn't surprise me. Some of the best bugs come out in the late afternoon and early evening. They might not be back till 7 or 8, especially if they're trying to avoid another dinner like last night's. I've had the house to myself all afternoon and my mom won't be home for another hour. I brought my laptop downstairs at 3, and for the past 2 hours I've been digging around. 3 cans of Coke later, and I've found some amazing stuff. I decided that I'm obsessed with Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, and Sir Isaac Newton. But as far as I'm concerned, these guys were rock stars. I can't see how a secret society would be interested in them. Who doesn't love a mad scientist? But after the research I did today, I think I'm starting to see a bigger reason why the members of the Crossbones have been interested in Boyle, Hooke, and Newton. A brief history of these 3 people it's worth writing down. First, Hooke, Robert Hooke. Many historians believe Hooke was the first person to use the word cell in relation to biology. That alone makes him larger than life. Imagine being the first person to use the word pizza or football or movie. Those are nothing compared to the words for the building blocks of all life as we know it, including pizza, football, and movies. Impressive. Robert Hooke did all these experimental things with air pumps and springs and elastic and a bunch of really great stuff. A lot of people gave Hooke credit for inventing balanced springs, which is what makes small timepieces possible. He theorized correctly about the combustion decades before anyone else understood it. He invented barometers, optical devices, microscopes, and universal joints. Hooke was one of the first people to accurately measure weather, to see objects too teeny for the naked eye, and survey huge parts of London so that he could rebuild after the Great Fire of 1666. He also figured out some very important stuff about the elasticity, but I have to admit I really didn't understand it. One of Sir Isaac Newton's more famous lines is actually in a letter he wrote to Robert Hooke. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So that's what Sir Isaac Newton, the discoverer of gravity, thought of Hooke. Not bad. Sir Isaac Newton is even more important than I realized. Sure, I knew he was impressive, but I could have spent all day researching a thing he invented and discovered that and not even scratched the surface. From gravity to planetary movement, from calculus and how light worked, Newton was at the forefront of so many groundbreaking discoveries. It's no wonder he's known as the father of science. And then there was the last of the 3, Robert Boyle, who turned out to be the most interesting. Let's start with his hair. The guy had the guts to go on the streets of London looking like that. Wow. Plenty of wigs to choose from at the wig shop, and he chose the biggest of the bunch. Robert Boyle was a scientist with devout religious beliefs. After reading up on him, I think this is one of the key things that made Boyle unique. He's not that other notable scientists of the time had no faith. It's just that Boyle was a Christian first and a scientist second. The fact that he was highly successful at both made him a powerful figure of his time. He admired God's workmanship and saw the study of natural science as a form of worship. The only way, in his view, to discover the world God had made was to investigate it. This seems like a sound idea to me. As far as I can tell, he was a little bit of a nutty professor. Just about everything Boyle ever wrote was short on organization and long on ideas. Imagine if he'd had a car. The keys would have gone missing all the time. He was constantly refuting the idea of other chemists and scientists, although he was often right. This might have had the effect of making him seem like a know-it-all to some. He was outrageously wealthy, and primarily because his father was one of the richest men in Ireland. His title, I'm not making this up, was the Great Earl of Cork. But I don't think he made cork or plungers or bottle caps. He lived in Cork, and I guess this is a place in Ireland. Anyways, this meant Boyle could afford to hire assistants, including Robert Hooke, yes, that Robert Hooke, to work for him. It was Boyle's idea to explore glass and pumps, but Hooke did many of the other hands-on experiments. Many people regard Robert Boyle as the most important chemist of his time, which makes the fact that he was an alchemist all the more interesting. You heard me right. Robert Boyle, the Robert Boyle, was a closeted alchemist. And not just a hobby alchemist, he was fairly obsessed with it. Apparently, Sir Isaac Newton also thought a lot about alchemy, but it was Boyle who appeared to have been at the forefront of the very subject of science. And while it's harder to find references to Robert Hooke in alchemy, something tells me he, of the three of them, was secretly working on this area together. Alchemy, I'm starting to learn, was then and continues to be today a controversial offshoot of the real chemistry. During Boyle's time, it was viewed as voodoo chemistry, where chemicals and metals were brought together in strange ways to accomplish outlandish things. It's not just serious science. And here we come to the most interesting thing of all. The thing that makes the appearance of their names in the crossbones make all the more sense in the world. Robert Boyle wrote a secret paper that didn't surface until a long time after his death. It was never meant to be published, but it was. This is what the paper was called: A Historical Account of the Degradation of Gold Made by an Anti-Elixir. If you believe this secret paper is by Boyle, he was very close to figuring out something that's remarkable and kind of scary for what it could mean. Robert Boyle was very close to finding out a way to turn gold into something else. Imagine if you could change the properties of gold so that it wasn't gold anymore, and then change it back again. Imagine. What if you worked on a gold dredge and had a way to hide gold or change gold, and then change it back? It can't be possible, can it? Could Boyle and Hooke and Newton have secretly figured out but told no one? What if the secret is out there and someone from a little town figured it out? A process like that would sure come in handy on a gold dredge. It might start to answer why so many members of the Crossbones ended up dead, why at least one of the dead doesn't want to leave the dredge. I'm stuck in my room where I just watched the last of my tiny speck of light from the sun disappear. Summer is fading fast and I'm used to stay light until almost 10 out here. Not anymore. Mom comes home at 6 and made me dinner. It wasn't as bad as I expected it to be, but then again, it's hard to mess up when you're making spaghetti and the sauce is out of the jar. We sat together in the kitchen table and waited for Dad and Henry to come home. They're not coming back for dinner, are they? Mom asked me. She was twirling the forkful of pasta. I wouldn't count on it. Without Henry around, it was quieter. I'm beginning to think I prefer the quiet. It's a lot of work holding up my end of the conversation. Mom and I mostly sat in silence, which was okay. We talked about what I'd done all day, and I told her I spent most of my time at the cafe writing and drawing. That sounds nice. It felt good to be out of the house, I said. I think I'm ready to get back to school. This town is awful dull during the day with no one around. Mom smiled. I was glad to make her think I wanted to go back to school like a normal kid, even if I wasn't too sure about it myself. There's going to be a lot of questions about the accident and what I've been doing. I could live without all the attention. Dad and Henry finally stumbled in around 8, arguing about who caught the bigger fish, and smelling like two guys who hadn't taken a shower in about a month. We're starved. What's cooking? Asked Henry. Whatever was cooking is gone, Mom replied. You're on your own. Henry and Dad looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders, and went straight for the Bisquick. What is it with you two and pancakes, asked my mom. They didn't answer, the two old friends in the kitchen making the easiest of all foods. I envied them, their time together like never before. It was out a lot today, and I'm tired, I say. I didn't mean for it to sound like I was irritated, especially when Henry leaving and all. But I think it was obvious that I saw them as a little club no one else was invited into. You sure you don't want a cake or two? Henry said. I could tell you about how I caught 10 times more fish than your dad did. I thought you had to go visit Gerald down the road, Dad said. Henry nodded and then said, Gerald can wait a while. He'll be up late, and he always is. Gerald is another old friend of Henry's. He lives in the next town over, a town that has the distinction of having been the very last place in America to get a phone service. It's even more of a dead end than Skeleton Creek. Gerald is quite a bit older and can't go fishing anymore. But Henry always visits him at least once on every trip from New York. Fishing had been so good for 2 weeks he put it off until the last minute. Henry did a little more begging and Dad nodded like he wanted to spend some time with me. So I sat with them on the porch for almost an hour, acting more and more tired as the minutes passed, till Henry jumped onto the chair so he could drive the 10 minutes to Gerald's place. I was sure my mom used the time I was on the porch to check my computer and phone. At least I could turn in early and they wouldn't have any reason to bother me. I came up a little while ago, right before the sun started setting, right about 9. And I checked my email, nothing. I checked again at 9:01. There it was. Note from Sarah. It was cool to think she was sitting on her computer and me on mine. Somehow in those 60 seconds we made a connection. She clicked send, I refreshed the screen, and there was the note. It was sort of like magic, and I missed her more than ever. I'm so glad you stayed at the cafe. Who knows what would have happened right under our nose if not for you. This is it, Ryan. Something really big's happening tonight, and we're gonna see it. I'm sure I can go into the Watts place while the meeting is going on. My parents, believe it or not, are on a date. They should be back in about half an hour. I'll see them when they get home so they can think everything's normal. If all goes well, they'll be asleep by 11 and I'll go straight to Longhorns, and then to Dr. Watts' house. Watts has to be hiding something, and this is the best chance to find out what. He can't be in 2 places at once, so we know he'll be out of his house. I just hope I can get inside. I taped in the camera at Longhorns. Grunge will run for about 90 minutes. Hopefully that will be long enough to catch the entire meeting. I'll start it as close to midnight as possible. Okay, best part of all, I'll broadcast everything live for you. I can't go live with Crossbones meeting, but I can use my other camera, the one I used to broadcast live at the Dredge. I'll send you the feed. I'll go to the site by 11:30 if you can. That's when I'll start broadcasting off and on, just to be sure no one else is watching. To get to the feed, go to my site and use the password Mary Shelley. Scared but excited, this is going to be incredible. Sarah. I'm scared for her. I mean really scared. I'm not sure what we should do, if we should do this. I'm really close to bailing out. It's starting to remind me of the night I left for the Dredge and ending up trapped inside the secret room. I hate the way this feels. Like I have no control over things. All I can do is watch while my best friend breaks into 2 places in one night. And what if she gets caught? It's not hard to imagine the alarm on Dr. Watts' door going off, or her getting trapped in the basement at Longhorn's garage. One of those things could easily happen. I won't be able to do anything except for sit here and watch it happen. I picked up a copy of Frankenstein and started reading it to pass the time. Amazed how much I underlined and took notes in this old paperback. The margins are filled with little questions and comments. I've dog-eared about 30 of the pages and went back through page by page reading some of what I'd underlined and noted. None of those who have experienced them can conceive of the existence of science. This struck me as interesting, having just spent all my day reading about Newton, Hooke, and Boyle. I shunned my fellow creatures as if we were guilty of a crime. I can relate, Dr. Frankenstein. 2 years after making the monster, Frankenstein discovered it had killed his brother. This is when the doctor starts to really go nuts. In the margins, I wrote, he had never considered what the creature might do. A darn good question if I say so myself. Later, referring to Dr. Frankenstein's character, I scribbled in the margins, it sounds as though he has conceived justice will prevail. It's questioned whether or not Dr. Frankenstein was right about that. I wrote all over this book in hundreds of different places, like a story, and the questions I erased in my mind were too big for the pages to hold. These are just a few of the scribbles in the margins. What did he tell them? He has set his course on doom and power, the dead and the innocent. These are his obsessions now. Was he never afraid? Am I constantly afraid? Pastoral, this is the devil, I'm sure of it. He would commit another to the same misery. He has killed accidentally. The monster is innocent because he has no remorse. The apple and the angel, abandoned, alone, immortal. What's that noise? When I look at the margin notes, I can see why some people might wonder about me. Maybe my parents are worried I'll grow up to be a reclusive weirdo who can't be in a room full of people without having his notes in a book or a journal to write things down in. And the strangest thing? I have no memory of writing these things. Maybe I did it at night asleep instead of when trashing the walls of my room. It's 11:30. Time to go online.